So Yarka's not around at this exact moment, but we can send her the recording. Hi Yarka, if you're watching.
Hi, Eric. Nice to meet you.
So, okay, let me pull up where we've been chatting. So I feel like there are two threads to what we're discussing. One is just kind of like how to do this custom role thing in the first place, and then there's the rake task that you were mentioning. Which one do you want to discuss first?
I don't think the rake task is really important, actually. I think it's actually something that we can eventually get to when we're closer to actually doing some of the breaking changes. I think what's more important is just making sure, well, for me to understand if I'm what dots to connect with the permission stuff. I was
Yeah.
able to get like the read dependency permission across, so that's been merged, and that seems to work fairly well. I hit the member roles API. I was able to enable it for a member and disable it, and that was really straightforward because of all the pieces that were already laid down. I think it's the project security, group security, and then the hierarchy of all the permissions that I'm a little confused around and how to
Uh-huh.
connect those. I'm really afraid that I'm gonna connect the wrong member role permission to the wrong permission in declarative policy, and then everything's just going to so so
Okay.
I'm like, okay. I think so that I'd love to talk more about how we're doing member roles for project level and group level. I looked
Yep.
at your MR and it looked like most of that is already abstracted away through the user.can permission something. There's one method there where you pass in the actual resource and the permission name, and then it checks if it's a group or project, I think.
Yes, exactly. So hopefully that makes it easy from a performance perspective. That all that stuff with the preloader and making it work
Yep.
for groups is just to make sure that it's performant in the case like where there might be an n+1. Otherwise, we're caching it, but it's like a per request cache, so it's not cached in any more long-term way, like with Redis.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was kind of the huge blocker when we first started working on custom roles, was like, is this going to be performant enough to hit the database, on every request? I think the answer is that it is performant enough as long as we're doing one database query, not n+1. So you're customizing. Let me just try to remember with my morning brain. You're adding, you want to make sure that users with a custom role that has read vulnerability can view the security dashboard for a group. Is that right?
Yeah, like I think there's what product wants, what we have in terms of member roles, and I think I'm trying to bridge that. So when I looked at the original Epic, I think there was 5 different things that they wanted. One was to be able to do custom permission for read vulnerability, admin vulnerability, uh, breed project security dash or breed. I think they just said view security dashboard and then admin merge request, and I'm forgetting the last one. And so those were like pretty high level, but they didn't necessarily connect. I guess when I got confused was like, how do I connect these high level concepts to the details?
Mm-hmm.
And admin vulnerability and read vulnerability were already done, I think, when I came in. And read
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability was connected to the read vulnerability declarative policy. And underneath that was a whole bunch of other stuff like read security resource. And then it was weird because it was prefixed with read, but it gave it like mutable permissions or permissions that allow you to mutate stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but that was before I think any of us looked at this. So um, and then the view security dashboard, I think, was the one I'm like, okay, after I got read dependency done, because that was pretty straightforward. To access the dependency list page, you just need the read dependencies declarative policy. And so by
Mm-hmm.
adding a read dependency member role column, I could connect that up pretty easily. And that seemed like a safe one. So that one's in. And that allows access to the dependency list. Now, then we started talking about like having the single permission to like control all the security stuff. And I'm not sure if dependency list as a page falls into that. The moment haven't really brought that up because there's already a permission to control access to that. And then the next thing I looked at was the project security or the security dashboard. And so as I was looking at security dashboard, I'm like, what is the security dashboard? What does it mean? How do I get to it? And that's when I started reading code. And then the code I found, we had 3 types of security dashboards: project security dashboard, group security dashboard, and the instance security dashboard. So a lot of this is like a lot of unknowns for me, and I'm sort of learning as we go here.
Yeah.
I thought that given what we had, I could start with project security dashboard, just restricting access or enabling access to the project security dashboard through the custom role. And that's when I started asking, do we need like to differentiate between the read project security dashboard and read group security dashboard? And then I think that's when you kind of came in and shared an issue that you had already opened up, because you'd already done some analysis around, here are all the permissions we have, here's some of the overlap, and here's what we could refactor towards. And in my gut, I was like, yeah, let's do that. I want to do that. But then I also don't know what is the downstream consequence of doing that, because I don't know all the permissions and how they came into play, and what the higher level goal is, and if it aligns with product's desire.
Yeah.
Because I think they called the epic granular permissions. I'm like, does granular mean they want to be able to control each individual like action on the page or access to each page? To me, that creates, a lot of columns on that table.
Yes.
So it's a wide table, but it makes it easy to read. But I don't know, like, as an engineer, I'm like, one permission to rule them all sounds good to me, because then it's much easier to like cognitive load to carry, rather than, okay, if I want to do this one thing, I have to remember this permission and it aligns to, I guess, this column. And then I started to get concerned about like, okay, we have this read vulnerability column now. We have a read vulnerability declarative permission, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing, because the read vulnerability permission is going to enable other things, I think.
Okay. So yeah, this is all you have good questions. You seem to like understand the problem space. I think that last statement you made about the declarative policy permissions and the custom permissions being different,
Yeah.
that is not quite right. Or at least like we're using the custom permissions to enable a regular permission, right? We're
Okay. So
saying
there's like a one-to-one
there should
thing.
be a one-to-one, which is part of what makes all of this so complex, right? Because we're like working with this existing gnarly system of
Yeah.
hundreds slash thousands of permissions, and we're like,
Yes.
customize this one. And
Yes.
sometimes the entry point isn't very clean. It's not just
I,
like it sounds like with read dependency, you had a pretty easy time just saying, go customize this. It's pretty, siloed off in its own little world, and like, oop,
it
it's
was
on. Now I
pretty
can see it.
coupled. Yeah.
That's good. That's ideal. Yeah, some of these other permissions were less like that, and I think read vulnerability was one of those. And I think you mentioned seeing logic where like read vulnerability was enabling something else. I think read security resource,
I
or
forget
vice
which
versa.
direction it was, but it was one way or the other. And then read security resource gave you access to do things like export vulnerability report, change the status of vulnerabilities. And like, to me, I was like, oh, that's no longer like reading when you're changing the status of a vulnerability. That's more
Okay.
like
Yeah,
managing or admin.
yeah, it shouldn't allow you to change the status. We can check on that.
Okay.
I do think it allows you to export vulnerabilities because there's like an export button, and we're considering that to be something of a read type action. It's like, well, if you can read the vulnerabilities, why not be able to export them, kind of thing.
Okay.
Read vulnerability. I'm taking a note on that. So, and I think this is a very valuable exercise for us in terms of how do we both like do knowledge transfer and help other people like understand how permissions work in general so that they can work with them more confidently, or like build tooling so that it's easier, right? So not just learn it, but also um, figure it out. And I think like one observation you made about, okay, I got this epic from product with like 5 different asks. I can totally see we've encountered the same kind of challenges with translating a product requirement into a custom role because what product is looking at is a documentation and the documentation is manually generated. So the name of a permission in there and exactly
Oh,
what it does might not map to what is happening in the code. So if someone says, "Oh, customize read security dashboard," because they're seeing that like in the docs page on permissions, but like it might be called like, read some other random word in the code. And so you're like, wait, I guess this is read security dashboard. So it's like that's super confusing.
okay.
Um,
That is good to know because that might mean that there's discrepancies between the documentation and what's actually happening. Okay. Okay.
I know that's part of this whole project. One of the original asks was like, can we automate our documentation? And I think we can get there, but we're not there today. So that's just not what we have. And then I was gonna ask you if you, let me DM you. By the way, I have to end at 7:30 or in 15 minutes because I have another
Yep.
meeting. So I always like to go long on every meetings, but don't let me do that. Have you been looking at this documentation page on custom roles at all?
I read through the technical blueprints, I think they're called. And that's kind of what got me. Well, I learned about debugging declarative policies through the
Okay.
environment variable. There's quite a bit of useful information there. And in terms of actually adding a new custom role permission, it was really
Mhm.
straightforward. Like
Okay. Okay.
it made sense to me.
Okay.
And the
Okay.
work
Because
that we're doing to support groups also makes sense to me.
yeah.
Um, I think the confusion for me is probably more around like how to take the product requirement and connect it to what we actually want.
Mhm.
Like what we think is happening versus what's actually happening, I think is maybe skewed a bit.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and so I want to make sure that we get that aligned as we're adding support for some of these things in the custom roles. Um,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And I think that's where we can look at that together now. I definitely think that's where like getting like the user story of like as a user with a custom role, I can log in and view this page is helpful because it's like sometimes yeah, somebody says something like security dashboard. I'm like, what even is a security dashboard in GitLab? Like we have three of them, like you mentioned. Is it all of them? Is it one of them?
Yeah, I think it helps when some of the product requirements are written in the problem space as opposed to the solution space. And like the rake task is totally solution
Hmm.
space, right? Like, and I'm like, why do we need a rake task? So I love it up there. I'm like, I think
Yeah.
this is the next actionable thing, but it's not actually useful until we deprecate. And I think what we're trying to deprecate is like right now there's this implicit access to security pages if you're a developer or maintainer. And I think that exists because that was the way that we could get you access prior to custom roles. And now we
Oh,
want to remove that. So if you're a developer, you don't automatically get access to the security pages. And if you're a maintainer, you don't automatically get access to the security administration. You have to be awarded that through custom role management. I think that's where we're trying to get to. And maybe it's a conversation I need to have with Alana to clarify and make sure.
yeah. Well, because custom roles are an ultimate only feature, my primary or like the first thing I thought of when I got that is like, oh, okay, so can
Oh, the
nobody in
security
premium, yeah, like can nobody in premium see these, or do you want to just remove it? Like, I guess only an
Oh,
owner can
that's a
see it in premium.
great question. I didn't even think of that. Because if we are going to do that sort of deprecation, we need to make sure that the other tiers that are supposed to have access to it can be supported. Um, thank you.
No problem. Always happy to ask questions. I'm just taking a note on that. So yeah, so we can't really, well, I wouldn't want to say can't. We have to be careful gating access to features when it's like only a custom role can do that. That's I think why I was a little bit surprised to see that like plan, because that's not something that's come up so far. And because again, custom roles are ultimate only, we want to make sure that we're only using them to gate ultimate only features if we want to do that at all.
I'm gonna ask that question.
Okay. And your
Um,
other your other comment about like whether to use the same permission names for groups and projects versus different, I would definitely work hard to make them the same if possible. There is like an epic somewhere deep in a dusty backlog that where we would like to really consolidate all group and project permissions more. Like there's a lot of overlap right now.
do
There's a
you
lot of
mean like
duplication.
instead of read project security dashboard and read group security dashboard, it would just be read security dashboard, and then the names, or I forget the polymorphic type. I think it's like it's either
Resource.
project or group.
Yeah.
Or no, there isn't a polymorphic association, but there's a way to distinguish whether that permission would apply to a project level or a group level, right? Okay, yeah, I like that too. It means like the same permission name, but the scope is wider or smaller. So you can scope to project or group, and the one with the higher, like larger scope, probably wins.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think that it depends on the permission, like where the membership is, right? So if someone has a custom role, and actually read vulnerability already lets you see the security dashboard because
Yeah,
there
see that right
there's
now.
yeah, there's no way. When we first added read vulnerability, we realized, and this is in general a challenge with custom roles, we realized that if we allowed somebody to like read a singular vulnerability, there's no way for them to get to that page if they
Yeah,
can't read the dashboard.
yeah,
So we probably should have named it differently. Lesson learned. That's why there's an issue for that. But basically, read vulnerability equals like read security dashboard on projects. So I'm adding that for groups. And so if you have a membership on a group with that custom role where you can read vulnerability, you can read the group security dashboard, and then you can read the project security dashboards for all the projects within that group. Um, and so that cascading is nice as opposed to, oh, you want to read group and if we did those separate and we had a permission called read group security and read project security dashboards, you'd have to add those both to the custom permission in order to see the child project security dashboards, which is just a lot for admins to manage and understand.
yeah, I think you're right. They choose, okay, is this project level or group level? And then what do I want to give them? Read on the security dashboard, or read on vulnerability, or sorry, maybe that was a bad example, but read on vulnerability versus read code.
Yeah.
Read
And
code on,
some
yeah.
some things read code doesn't exist on groups, right? Because there's no
Yeah,
code on a group. So there are some, from what I've noticed, there are more permissions that exist on a project that don't exist on a group because project has some unique attributes. But where there is overlap,
this one
conceptual overlap
matters.
at least, it's nice to name them the same because otherwise the admin panel for creating custom roles is going to be just a nightmare.
Yeah, we'd be using naming as a way to distinguish whether it's like a group level permission or a project level permission. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
And
And
then let's say there is instance level permissions or something at some point, that gets kind of gnarly, I guess. But with
yeah.
sorry, I don't, you know what, I don't want to scare you.
Are you
I take
thinking
it
about
back.
the organization blueprint? Because that came up
I
this
was
week.
I was yeah, I just, the only thing I came on was instance because that's where I saw the in the project security dashboard, but I am thinking about organization now.
Yeah, that came up this week as something that might, because right now the custom roles are defined at the root group level, but with organization, we're essentially adding a level above that. So the question is, do custom roles belong there? I actually don't think they do. But then if you wanted to customize one of those roles, how would you do that? Like, where are those defined? Maybe at the instance level.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I asked that to whoever I was talking to on that issue. I can't remember right now. Christina, Laura? Um,
I think you have way more GitLab friends than I do, so I don't even know. I probably wouldn't even know who they are
oh,
yet.
I'm your GitLab friend. So by transitive property, you have all my friends.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, now I'm popular, I guess. Um,
Um, okay. So, and then because you were noting before that one concern you had was of like enabling too much, like enabling one permission to another. And so I was wondering if you had looked at, you said you looked at the docs, but the specifically, I mean, because the first thing I think that's really helpful, let me share my screen really quickly.
sure.
Uh, I swear I'm gonna learn. Nope, that's not it. I learned how to share my screen on Zoom before. I've been using Zoom for 10 years. Okay, this is the documentation that you looked through. So one thing that I found really helpful, like I built this
Yeah, that
functionality because
didn't
I needed it.
policies is awesome.
Yeah.
When I read that, I was like, this is amazing. And the output
Yay.
is so clean. So you wrote that?
Yes,
Thank you.
because I was trying to customize a role and I was like, how am I supposed to know which
Yeah.
permissions are checked on this page, right? Like, and it's still honestly challenging, right? Because you get the output and it's like, okay, we check these 15 permissions and you're like, okay, I have to now go through um, these 15 permissions and see what they do. And then when you go down here, you can analyze them um, to
This I
get a
haven't
sense
done
of the,
yet, but I have
okay.
used permit variable. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
this could be helpful for the refactoring you're doing, I think, because you already know what the end
oh
state
yeah,
is
you're
that you
right.
want. Hmm.
Yes, thank you. I think what I want to do is like visualize the permissions in some way to understand the hierarchy or their relationship to one another, all within like the security pages space, so
Hmm.
that I know, okay, if I attach this custom role permission to this declarative policy permission, I can see everything that it inherits. And right
Hmm.
now, I guess I'm reading code to try to mentally map it in my head. Like right now, I've got the project policy page or file open, and I can see that read security resources enabled. It also enables read vulnerability, read project security dashboard, create vulnerability export, admin vulnerability issue link, admin. Oh yeah, that's right. So you can like create it.
Admin, admin vulnerability issue link.
Yeah, yeah, I'm looking at. Yeah, actually, if you have the console open, maybe we can try just read security resource
Yeah,
on the project policy.
yeah. Let's look at that. Yeah, there was like a partial rename. You might have seen that in the issue I created of like read vulnerability to read security resource some years ago, but it wasn't finished. So
I
now
did
it's
see
just like
that, yeah. And then I think I brought read vulnerability back for the AI stuff because
nice.
that was I think there was like a naming convention that needed to be followed. And it was like read underscore resource name. Um, and I was like, oh no, did I undo someone's work by bringing that back?
Oh, it's okay. I mean, like that. This is what I'm learning. As I spend more time at GitLab, as it's like if you don't create a Rubicop rule for it, nobody will ever know that it's a convention. So, um,
That's,
okay. So read security resource enables read group security dashboard.
oh,
And then,
then I'm reading this wrong.
or is it, does
Oh,
it
sorry,
enable
project
it?
policy. Project, can you do that for project policy?
Oh yeah, yes. Good call. I like how our example is for group policy, but we don't even support group policies. Okay.
Okay, that's much less than what I'm seeing in the code. So I see in project policy, you've got 3 minutes, by the way. So in project policy, EE app policies.
Oh, it might be that it's because I'm not checking E in the console.
Oh, okay.
I may need to explicitly, let's see. I hadn't considered that. Maybe like this?
Um,
Hmm, maybe just namespace
yeah,
it.
you got it.
This? Yeah. Yeah, still not that big. I mean, it's bigger.
There's
I
quite a
think,
few. I see it should enable read project security dashboard, create vulnerability, export, admin vulnerability issue link, admin vulnerability merge request link, and admin vulnerability external issue link.
rules for an ability. So this is not saying what this enables. This is saying like the rules to enable this, I think,
Oh, yes. Okay.
which is kind of
Yes,
confusing,
that
and we
makes
should
sense. Okay.
clarify
So
that in the
it's not worth.
docs. Okay.
If can we try it on if there's time? Just
Yeah.
one of them. Admin underscore vulnerability underscore issue link. Oh, you spelled vulnerability correct the first try. That always gets me.
I've typed this word many times, so
Yes.
not a practice. Okay. So if you
So
have read security resource
that's
and
one
then
of them.
it's prevented if
If
you
you're
are
not a
an,
developer,
I
that's not
guess,
right.
yeah, an auditor, but not a developer.
And I think that's the stuff that we're trying to get away from, or at least if I understand the product requirement, is like because we didn't have a specific role for like security engineer or security focused person. And I
Okay.
think so these permissions were added to like developer and maintainer as a way to give access. And now we want to be able to allow organizations to have a specific role for like a security focused person so that a maintainer can't go in and mark a vulnerability as resolved without it going through the security triage process or something like that.
I see, I see. So like in the old world, old way
In
of
the
doing things, in the olden days, you would have added a new like security role basically that has maybe more granular permissions, but that is hard because of the hierarchy we have today. Like it would have to be have fewer permissions than developer, I guess. It
yeah,
seems like a good use case. Like I understand that use case, and I honestly had no idea that that was even what you're trying to do until just now. So that's helpful context.
and I'm inferring that from what I've read too. So Alana will correct me if I'm wrong, right, Alana?
Right, Alana, are you watching? Are you there? Um, okay, well, I feel like I've not answered many questions, but we had a nice chat. It was fun.
uh,
Yeah.
I
And
I will probably wait till your MR is merged before I start any work. But I think I saw in your MR you've actually already added the project security or read security. Sorry, you've added read group security dashboard for the group policy.
I added read vulnerability, but secure to enable that, we check if security dashboard is enabled, and we need to like invert that dependency. So security dash or we check, are you a developer or are you security dashboard enabled? It will be similar to what we already did for project policy. So yeah, policy
I'm
project.
just going to send you a link, or I think I'm going to send you a link. No, I'm not going
Yeah.
to send you.
And okay. I think I have to go in a second, but
Yeah,
I think
okay.
the end state of what you're going to want to do is like write a high level test of like when I have this custom role, I can view this security dashboard in a group. And I think what you're going to find is that that fails because there's like another permission that's being checked. And so you're going to have to link those or consolidate them or do something with those permissions.
Okay.
So
Thank you for your time.
thank you. Thank you for working on this. It's fun to work together again.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.